I made the choice I thought was right, yet even after all these years, the ache hasn't faded. My name is Margaret. I am 79 years old, and there is a man I never married who still visits my thoughts more often than the one I actually did. It's as if time hasn't touched him, and memories of what could have been linger like whispers I can't ignore. Every now and then, I wonder what life might have been like if I had chosen differently, and that question never fails to stir something deep within. I met Daniel when I was 22, the summer after college, when everything in life felt like it was about to begin and nothing had settled into place yet. He worked at the small library downtown, shelving books with a kind of care that made it look like each one mattered, and I had taken a temporary job at the bakery next door while I figured out what came next. We started talking in the narrow alley between our buildings during our breaks, sitting on upside-down milk crates, sharing cigarettes neither of us really liked, just to make the conversations last longer. He was not flashy, not the sort of man people turned to stare at, but when he listened to you, you felt like the only person in the world who had ever had that particular thought. I had grown up in a loud house, 3 brothers, a mother who filled every silence with instructions, and a father who believed feelings were things you handled privately. So being heard like that felt new and a little frightening. Daniel asked questions no one had ever asked me, not about what I planned to do, but about what I wanted to feel like when I was old. What kind of life would let me sleep peacefully at night? Around that same time, I was also seeing Thomas, who would later become my husband. Thomas had a good job already, wore pressed shirts even on weekends, and spoke about the future like it was something you could map out with a ruler and a pen. My parents adored him. He came from a respectable family, talked about buying a house before he was 30, and never once made me wonder where I stood with him. With Thomas, life looked safe, clear, and approved of. With Daniel, life looked wide and uncertain. He talked about moving to another state, maybe going back to school, maybe writing a book one day, though he said that last part like a secret he did not fully believe himself. When I was with him, I felt larger somehow, as if the edges of me stretched beyond what I had been told was practical. But I also felt unsteady, like standing near the edge of deep water without knowing how well I could swim. The choice did not happen in one dramatic moment. It came in small steps, polite dinners with Thomas and my parents, gentle pressure disguised as concern, questions about Daniel that always sounded like warnings. I told myself I was being sensible, that love was not only about feeling understood on a milk crate in an alley, that a good life required structure and planning. When Thomas proposed, with a modest ring and a speech he had clearly practiced, I said yes because it seemed like the kind of answer a responsible young woman gave. Telling Daniel was the hardest conversation I had ever had up to that point. We walked in the park near the river, and I explained that I needed stability, that I was thinking about the long term, words that sounded borrowed from someone older and more certain than I was. He did not argue. He just nodded, hands in his pockets, and said he hoped I would have the life I wanted. The way he said it made me feel, for the first time, that wanting and choosing were not always the same thing. Thomas and I had a decent marriage. That is the truth, and I do not want to rewrite my life into something it was not. He worked hard, he was faithful, and together we raised 2 children who grew into kind adults. We paid our bills, took summer trips to the lake, sat side by side on the couch in the evenings watching television. There was laughter, there was partnership, and there were years when I did not think about Daniel much at all because life was full and busy. But every now and then, usually in quiet moments, he would come back to me. When I watched someone reading alone on a park bench, when I passed a library and caught the smell of old paper, when one of my children asked a question about life that had no easy answer, I would remember how he used to look at me, as if my thoughts were worth waiting for, and I would feel a small, sharp ache that did not seem to belong to my present life. As I got older, the differences between love and compatibility became clearer. Thomas and I functioned well together, like two people rowing a boat in steady rhythm. But there were parts of me he never quite saw because I had learned not to show them. With Daniel, I had shown them without trying. I sometimes wonder if he would have grown impatient with the ordinary parts of me, or if I would have grown tired of his uncertainty. There is no way to know, and that is part of what makes memory so powerful. It leaves space for both regret and mercy. Thomas passed away 12 years ago. The house grew very quiet after that. In the evenings, I would sit by the window with a cup of tea, and the past would feel closer than the future. One afternoon, I found an old book while cleaning out a closet, a novel Daniel had lent me that I had never returned. Inside the cover, in his neat handwriting, he had written, "For Margaret, who asks the right questions." I sat on the floor and cried, not because my life had been bad, but because I suddenly felt the weight of the road not taken, still stretching out somewhere, untouched. I looked him up, eventually. It took some effort, asking around, searching through old records, and I learned he had moved west, had taught at a community college, had never married. He had passed away a few years before I found his name. There was no dramatic reunion waiting for me, no chance to see what our older faces would look like across a table. Just the quiet knowledge that the story of us had ended long ago, even though it had never properly begun. What I understand now, at 79, is that a choice can be right and still carry sorrow. We like to believe that if we are sensible, if we do what is expected and responsible, our hearts will fall neatly into place behind our decisions. Sometimes they do. Sometimes a small part of the heart lingers elsewhere, not to punish us, but to remind us of who we were when everything was still possible. I do not sit here wishing I could erase my marriage or trade my children for another life. Love is not a ledger where you compare columns and decide which was worth more. It is more like a landscape you walk through, with certain views you only see if you take one path and others you glimpse only from a distance. I saw beautiful things on the path I chose. I also saw, far off, another view I sometimes still imagine. If you are younger and listening to me, I am not here to tell you to follow your heart or your head, as if either one alone can guide you safely. I just want you to understand that whatever you choose, there may be a gentle ache that stays with you, and that does not mean you failed. It means you loved, and that your life could have held more than one true story. I am Margaret. I am 79 years old, and I have lived a full life with room in it for both gratitude and longing. If you carry a memory like mine, I hope you treat it kindly. Some ghosts are not there to haunt you, only to remind you that your heart once opened wide, and that in its own way is something to be thankful for.